The morning of April 17th, 1847, dawned misty and grey over London, shrouding Isabella Munro's chamber in a ghostly fog that tightly clung to the paned windows like the breath of some ancient spirit. Despite the chill clinging to the air, the atmosphere inside the Munro estate buzzed with restless energy, a harmonious cacophony of servants slipping about, lighting fires, arranging flowers, and preparing linens. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day Isabella, the nobleman's daughter, was to become the Duchess of Richmond, a promise woven into her destiny before she could even speak her first word. Isabella stood motionless before the ornately framed looking glass, the delicate pearl buttons of her wedding gown secured with care by her long-time maid and confidant, Martha. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, crafted painstakingly over 6 months by London's finest seamstresses, each stitch a thread toward the future that had been set out for her since birth. Yet for all the elegance that wrapped her slender form, her heart trembled beneath the layers like the pale rose on her cheek. Martha, her voice thick with feeling, whispered that Isabella looked radiant. The years that had passed since the day she was dedicated to this union now seemed to culminate in this moment. A quiet dignity gathered in Isabella's grey eyes as she adjusted her veil, heart swelling with secret joy. She had been trained, educated, and sculpted to be a duchess. Fluent in French, Italian, and German, skilled in music and art, and versed in court etiquette far beyond her years, she was poised to stand beside one of the most powerful men in England. She remembered Edward Richmond not as a childhood stranger, but as the distant, dignified figure she'd glimpsed across salons and gardens, whose rare compliments on her French had set her heart alight with dreams. In her private journal, she had already signed her new name in elegant script, Isabella Richmond, Duchess of Richmond. The butler's voice interrupted her reverie. "The carriage awaits, miss." With one final steadying breath, she let the veil descend fully over her face, a symbolic veil between the girl she had been and the woman she was about to become. Lord William Munro, her stoic father, awaited her carriage, a man who viewed this day as the cementing of their family's rise into the aristocratic elite. His pride was palpable, though he offered no tender words, only the firm handshake of duty and expectation. The journey to the ancestral chapel was a blur of awakening spring vistas, budding trees, pale white blossoms, and the slowly lifting fog that revealed the stately greystone walls and soaring Gothic spires of the Richmond estate's place of worship. Inside, flickering candlelight and the scent of hundreds of white roses filled the air. Nearly 300 guests, England's high society in full regalia, had gathered to witness this historic union. The hero of Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington, himself was among the honoured few, ascending the chapel steps with a grave and noble bearing. Isabella's heart thundered as she took her place at the chapel entrance, her father's arm steadying her trembling steps. All eyes were on her, but her gaze was fixed on Edward, standing at the altar in formal attire, handsome and proud. Time seemed to slow as she walked the aisle, passing her younger sister Charlotte, seated in the front pew, a striking girl in pale blue silk, her golden curls crowned with forget-me-nots. Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, and in Charlotte's smile lay a secret that sent a faint, unsettling shiver down Isabella's spine. Reaching the altar, Lord Munro ceremoniously placed Isabella's hand on the vicar's open prayer book, symbolically handing over his daughter to be wed. Then, as Edward finally turned to face her, Isabella expected warmth, even admiration, to meet her eyes. Instead, his expression was cold, distant, and resolute. Before the vicar could begin the ceremony, he raised his hand, a grave gesture that hushed the gathered crowd, and spoke words that thundered through the chapel. "I cannot proceed with this union." Silence fell like a heavy cloak. Shock rippled through the guests. A few ladies fainted, some men exchanged scandalized glances. Edward's voice resonated with cold finality. Such an important decision as marriage must be based on more than agreements made in infancy. Then turning toward Charlotte, he declared that it was she who had captured his heart with her youth and vivacity. The room buzzed with disbelief as Charlotte rose, flushed with triumph, and met Edward's gaze. Isabella felt her world crumble. The pain was a physical blow, stabbing through her heart and stealing her breath. Her father's rage erupted, demanding the honor of the binding betrothal contract be upheld. Edward, however, was unyielding, coldly offering to pay double the dowry as compensation, but refusing a lifetime bound to a woman he did not desire. He slashed at Lord Monroe's mercantile origins, a cutting insult that only further ignited the conflict. Amidst the swirling chaos and whispered condemnations, Isabella's composure hardened into a quiet dignity. She handed her bouquet to Martha, her voice steady, as she accepted Edward's decisive rejection. "I understand perfectly, Your Grace," she said with calm resignation. Removing the pearl necklace he had sent her that morning, she returned it to him, a symbol meant for the sister he had chosen instead. Turning to Charlotte, Isabella wished her sister joy with a carefully measured kindness that briefly dimmed Charlotte's triumphant smile. Then, with tears threatening but dignity unbroken, Isabella strode back down the aisle alone, her bridal path now transformed into an exile, a retreat from the place where she was meant to become a duchess. Outside, away from the watchful eyes of society, the storm of humiliation broke over her. The carriage that was supposed to carry a bride to her future, instead, bore a shattered young woman toward the sanctuary of her Aunt Agatha's townhouse in London. Martha, faithful and tender, shielded her from prying glances, offering gentle words. "You've done nothing wrong." Hold your head high, Aunt Agatha Harcourt was a formidable woman, tall and commanding with silver hair and sharp, discerning eyes. Unlike the society women who clung to gossip and rules, she lived independently, having never married, and inherited wealth of her own. Her fierce protection and clear-eyed assessment brought Isabella a balm long overdue. "Edward Richmond was an opportunistic cad," Aunt Agatha declared. "The fault lies not with you." She offered tea, comfort, and the sobering truth that this humiliation might one day reveal itself as a blessing, the opening of a prison cell gilded in coronets. In the days that followed, Isabella found refuge in Aunt Agatha's vast library. Between the rows of ancient tomes and modern novels, she escaped the suffocating whispers that followed her name across the city. Her heart found solace in the words of Shelley, Byron, and Mary Wollstonecraft, whose treatise on women's rights illuminated a new world of possibility. But Aunt Agatha would not let her hide forever. She secured invitations to a small literary salon hosted by Lady Pembroke, where the Spanish Duke of Valencia, Alejandro de Mendoza, was a guest. Reluctantly, Isabella attended, clad in a modest deep blue gown that marked the beginning of her transformation, not as a forsaken bride, but as a woman reclaiming her place in the world. The intimate gathering was a stark contrast to the grand balls she had once dreaded, a sanctuary where ideas, literature, and intellect flourished above gossip and social climbing. It was there that she met Alejandro, handsome, learned, and kind. Fluent in several languages and well-versed in Shakespeare and diplomatic affairs, he spoke to Isabella as a peer, interested in her opinions and thoughts, rather than her lineage or beauty. Their ensuing conversations, from Byron's melancholy to the nuances of international trade, sparked in her a flicker of life she had long thought extinguished. He invited her to explore London's British Museum, a proposal she accepted with cautious anticipation, accompanied by Aunt Agatha as chaperone. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a stirring of hope, of curiosity, and a tentative excitement about the unknown path unfolding ahead. Over the following weeks, Isabella and Alejandro were frequently seen together in the company of a small but discerning circle. Their meetings spanned the Royal Botanical Gardens, art exhibitions and concerts, and with each encounter, Isabella grew in confidence and self-understanding. Alejandro admired her intellect, resilience, and gentle heart, a sharp contrast to the cold, practical. Calculation she had known from Edward. One spring afternoon, beneath an arch of climbing roses heavy with fragrance, Alejandro shared stories of his youth in Valencia, the loss of his parents, the burden of his inheritance, and the preciousness of seizing happiness where it is found. He spoke candidly about nobility and character, recognizing in Isabella a strength that had not been diminished by scandal or rejection. Then, in a moment quiet and profound, he asked if she might consider a future not dictated by duty or old contracts, but chosen freely and equally, a life with him in Spain. The question, delivered with earnestness and hope, brought tears to Isabella's eyes. She realized that the chains forged by her past were breaking, replaced by a new, exhilarating freedom. As their relationship deepened, whispers in society followed, but Isabella no longer feared them. At a grand ball hosted by the Countess of Harrington, where Edward and Charlotte made their first public appearance as a married couple, Isabella arrived with Alejandro at her side. When Edward confronted her, the trace of his old arrogance was diminished, and Isabella met his smugness with quiet strength and grace. The sister who had betrayed her and the man who had humiliated her now seemed diminished by the woman she had become. Shortly before the close of spring, beneath the twinkling lights of that same ballroom, Alejandro proposed in earnest with a deep blue sapphire ring, a symbol of loyalty and truth. Isabella accepted, acknowledging that this was no arrangement of convenience, but a union forged in respect and mutual choice. Aunt Agatha's delighted applause confirmed what Isabella had begun to know. Her story was no longer one of loss, but of reclamation. Their wedding took place before summer in a small, elegant ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, with only close friends and family present. This time, Isabella walked not as a pawn betrothed at birth, but as a woman who had chosen her partner and herself. With vows spoken clearly in the sunlit church, their hands joined not as property exchanged, but as equals embarking on a shared journey. Lord Monroe's stiff nod was as close to blessing as she might receive, and it was enough. Weeks later, Isabella joined Alejandro aboard a ship bound for Spain. As the English coast faded into memory, she stood on deck feeling a peace and anticipation she had never known. The Mediterranean sun promised a new life, one shaped not by contracts but by love, resilience, and self-discovery. Alejandro's vision of Valencia, the golden stone palace, fragrant orange groves, generations of loyal staff treated as family, welcomed her as one of their own. Months into her new life, Isabella found herself transformed, her skin kissed by the Spanish sun, her Spanish flowing more naturally, and her spirit brighter than ever. She applied her intelligence and education to matters of agriculture, commerce, and governance, partnering with Alejandro to modernize the city's harbors and strengthen diplomatic ties. The woman who had once been defined by rejection had become a leader, a partner, and someone fully herself. As she nestled beside her husband on the palace terrace, she reflected softly, "What once shattered me was the very thing that set me free." Gratitude replaced bitterness, the past a stepping stone to a fuller life. In the warm Spanish evening, beneath a sky ablaze with stars unfamiliar yet wondrous, Isabella Monroe, now Duchess of Valencia, held Alejandro's hand and smiled. This was not the life she had been forced to accept, but the life she had chosen. And in that choice, she had found not only love, but her truest self.